Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into some fascinating new research.
Yeah, really cutting-edge stuff looking at Europe's rivers.
Exactly. Our mission today is to get you completely up to speed on the forces shaping these vital but often threatened ecosystems.
We're looking at a paper that honestly throws a few curveballs. It's called Environmental Heterogeneity Governing River Macrophyte. Beta diversity in Europe is scale and context dependent.
Quite a title.
It is.
Okay.
The lead author is Jiang, working with a big international team, including Jane Alahuhta.
Okay, so our goal here is to break this down for you. We'll cover what they looked at, why it matters, the, surprising discoveries, and what it all means for conservation across the continent.
All without you needing to wade through the full paper yourself.
Right. And then before we get into the technical side, let's talk about the main players here, macrophytes.
Ah, yes, macrophytes. They're crucial, but definitely overlooked sometimes. We're talking about the actual river plants, the mosses, the grasses, the larger aquatic plants.
It's a visible structure in the water.
Precisely. They form the base of the river ecosystem.
And we know freshwater systems everywhere are under immense pressure.
Yeah.
A lot of the research focus tends to go to, well, fish or maybe some invertebrates.
That's true, but macrophytes, they're the primary producers. They create oxygen, hold riverbeds together, process nutrients.
They build the habitat.
Exactly. Lose the plants, and you risk losing, well, everything else that depends on them. So understanding what drives their diversity is fundamental.
Okay, let's get into the core concept they measured. Beta diversity. What exactly is that?
Right. So beta diversity is essentially about spatial variation. If you look at one river site and then another one some distance away, how different is the list of species between those two sites?
It's a measure of turnover then.
It's a measure of turnover, yeah.
Yeah.
Or compositional change between locations. And importantly, they broke it down further.
Into two components, I see.
Yes, which gives much more insight. The first is species replacement.
Okay, so that's like species swapping out. One type of plant community gives way to another as conditions change.
Exactly. You move along an environmental gradient, say temperature or altitude, and different species replace each other. The total number of species might not even change much.
Driven by things like environmental filtering or competition, maybe?
Precisely those factors. The second component is species richness differences.
That sounds simpler. Just fewer species overall in one place compared to another.
Yeah, it's the difference in the actual count. Site A has 20 species, Site B only has 8. That difference is largely down to richness variation.
And that often signals things like pollution, habitat degradation, or maybe barriers stopping species getting there.
Often, yes. It can be linked to those kinds of pressures or limitations.
Now, a really key part of this study, something they really wanted to explore, was the role of geodiversity. That's not a term you hear every day in freshwater ecology.
No, it's more common in terrestrial studies, but it's incredibly relevant here. Geodiversity is basically the variety of the non-living parts of the environment.
So rocks, soils, landforms, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The physical landscape, the variety of geological materials, the topography, the underlying processes that shape the land over long timescales.
And why is that so important for river plants? More than, say, water temperature today?
Well, because it sets the fundamental stage. The geodiversity influences water chemistry, like what minerals dissolve into the water. It dictates the river's slope, the flow patterns, how sediments move.
Ah, so it controls the physical habitat template.
Precisely. It influences the long-term conditions and the types of niches available for plants. They hypothesized that more varied geology would mean more varied habitats, and thus higher beta diversity, more species turnover.
Makes sense. Let's talk about the scale of this work. It's impressive.
It really is. They covered 145 rivers spanning 5 really different European regions.
Portugal in the south, then Poland, Germany, Denmark, and way up to Finland in the north.
Yeah, so you have everything from Mediterranean climates to these northern glacially influenced systems. A huge environmental range.
And getting data from all those places to actually compare must have been tricky.
Oh, definitely. Harmonizing that data was a major undertaking. They standardized things like focusing on similar-sized streams, specific trawler orders, and only included sites with a reasonable number of species, at least 4.
To make sure they were comparing apples to apples, basically.
Exactly. That comparability is crucial for any large-scale ecological study.
And they made a key choice about what environmental factors to look at. They focused on the whole drainage basin, the catchment area, right? Not just measurements taken right at the riverside on one day.
Yes, and that's important. A single pH reading or a turbidity measurement tells you about that moment. But catchment level variables,
Hmm.
Things like the overall altitude range in the basin or the human footprint index.
The HFI, that's a measure of human impact, right? Like roads, cities, agriculture.
Correct. It integrates various human pressures across the whole catchment. These basin-level factors reflect the longer-term, broader-scale environmental conditions and constraints that shape the river ecosystem over time.
Okay, now for the really juicy part. The findings. Especially around latitude, this was surprising, wasn't it?
It really was. When they looked within individual regions, just Portugal or just Germany, for instance, they found that beta diversity tended to increase slightly with latitude, or there wasn't a strong pattern at all.
Kind of what you might expect, maybe? Different conditions further north?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But then they pooled all 145 sites together, looked at the entire European continent, and the pattern flipped.
Huh.
Across the whole continent, total beta diversity showed a negative relationship with latitude. Turnover actually decreased as you went further north.
Wait, hang on. So looking just within Germany, diversity might increase northwards, but looking across all of Europe, it decreases northward.
Exactly. It's a stark example of scale dependency.
Wow, that's wild. What does that imply?
It implies that the ecological processes driving diversity patterns are fundamentally different at different spatial scales. What holds true regionally might completely reverse continentally.
So a regional conservation plan based on local patterns might be totally wrong at a larger scale.
Potentially, yes. It highlights how crucial choosing the right scale for analysis and management is. This negative trend continentally, it aligns somewhat with ecological ideas like Rappaport's rule. The idea that species tend to have broader geographical ranges at higher latitudes.
Meaning less turnover between sites further north, because the same species are found over wider areas.
That's the idea, yeah. Fewer species swapping out as you move across the landscape.
Okay, so scale matters hugely. But what about those two components of beta diversity replacement versus richness differences? Was there a consistent winner there?
Oh, absolutely. Across all 5 regions, no exceptions, species replacement was the dominant component.
Really? Everywhere?
Everywhere. It accounted for over 60% of the total beta diversity in every region they studied. In Germany, it was up around 84%, Portugal around 78%. It was overwhelmingly turnover.
So the main story isn't about rivers simply becoming species poor in some areas. It's more about which species are present, changing dramatically from place to place.
That's the key message. It suggests that environmental filtering, different conditions selecting for different sets of species, is the primary force structuring these macrophyte communities across Europe, much more so than just widespread species loss varying from place to place.
Which points back to the importance of those environmental drivers you mentioned.
Exactly. Their analyses showed that environmental factors were significantly more important than just spatial distance or geographic arrangement in explaining the beta diversity patterns.
So drilling down into those environmental factors in the big cross-Europe analysis, what came out on top?
Environmental heterogeneity was really the star. Specifically, 2 factors consistently emerge as major drivers of total beta diversity across the continent.
Which were?
Altitude range within the river basin and geodiversity range.
Altitude range makes intuitive sense. Big elevation changes mean big temperature changes, flow changes, lots of different niches.
Right. Higher altitude range correlated positively with species replacement, as you'd expect, but interestingly, negatively with richness differences.
Okay. And the geodiversity range, how did that play out?
It strongly supported their hypothesis. Basins with a greater variety of geological features, rocks, soils, landforms, had significantly higher total beta diversity, higher macrophyte turnover.
So that underlying physical template, the geology, really does matter for plant diversity in rivers. It's not just about water quality or climate alone.
It seems to be a fundamental control, yes. Adding geodiversity metrics clearly added explanatory power beyond the more typical climate or land use variables.
There's always a but in ecology, isn't there? You mentioned context dependency. Did these big drivers hold up equally well everywhere?
Well, no. And this is where it gets complex. While altitude range and geodiversity range were key at the continental scale, when I look at each country individually, the picture changed a lot.
How so?
The relative importance of different variables really shifted. For example, in Portugal, annual precipitation and the human footprint index became very important, along with altitude range.
But then in Germany...
In Germany, geographic distance itself was a major factor for replacement, alongside mean altitude and altitude range. Precipitation wasn't as key there. Finland highlighted altitude and geodiversity range again. Denmark showed mean geodiversity and precipitation as important.
So the Human Footprint Index, the HFI, its importance was kind of all over the place. Strong in some regions, weaker in others.
Exactly, which makes it really difficult to draw a simple, universal conclusion about human impact. It seems its effect strongly depends on the specific environmental and socioeconomic context of the region.
And the authors acknowledge this complexity.
Oh, yes. They point to this strong context dependency as a key challenge, and maybe a limitation. Because the data, while carefully harmonized, came from different existing surveys, not originally designed for this specific cross-European comparison, it's harder to definitively explain why the drivers shift importance so much between regions.
Okay, let's pull this together. What are the big implications here, especially for conservation? If species replacement dominates and environmental heterogeneity is key, what should managers do?
Well, the dominance of replacement tells us something crucial. Protecting just one or two very large river areas might not be enough if they are environmentally uniform.
Because you wouldn't capture the turnover.
Exactly. To conserve the full spectrum biodiversity, you need to protect a network of sites that collectively represent the widest possible range of environmental conditions, multiple sites spanning the gradient.
And based on their findings, which specific conditions should be prioritized in that network?
The results strongly suggest prioritizing rivers that span significant altitude ranges and, critically, rivers located within catchments that have high geodiversity.
So we need to think beyond just clean water and actively protect areas with diverse geology and topography.
That seems to be the message. Protecting the physical variety of the landscape surrounding the river is likely key to maintaining the biological variety within it. Look at the rocks, the soils, the hills.
And that finding about scale dependency, the patterns changing between regions and the continent, what does that mean for policy?
It means a one-size-fits-all conservation strategy across Europe is probably doomed to fail.
Right.
Management plans need to be tailored to the specific scale and the specific environmental context of the region you're working in. You can't just copy-paste a plan from Denmark to the Alps.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Huh?
What about future research? Where do we go from here?
Well, the researchers themselves point to a few key areas. One is getting finer-grained, more localized geodiversity data to see how those smaller-scale variations play out.
And moving beyond correlation to causation.
Exactly. And also directly testing the role of biotic interactions.
Like plant competition. You mentioned Rappaport's rule and latitude. Is there an idea that competition might be stronger in the south, maybe reducing turnover there?
That's a classic hypothesis in macroecology, that biotic interactions like competition are stronger in warmer, lower latitudes. It could contribute to some of the patterns seen, but it needs specific empirical testing in these river systems. It's often assumed, less often proven for these specific communities.
So wrapping this deep dive up, a major takeaway seems to be the underappreciated role of the physical environment, particularly geodiversity, in structuring these vital river plant communities. It's not just climate and pollution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And perhaps the most provocative thought to leave listeners with stems from that context dependency. Given how strongly the relationships change with scale and location across Europe, maybe the biggest realization is that designing effective, large-scale conservation policy for river biodiversity requires us to first map and understand the unique geodiversity and altitudinal gradients of each individual region. A truly effective plan has to be geographically explicit.
A powerful point. It forces us to look at the landscape itself. We encourage you, listening, to think about what features in your own local areas might reflect this kind of crucial environmental heterogeneity.